All right. So we are recording right now. Again, thank you so much for joining our webinar this evening. For those of you that were able to sign up to get a bee kit like this with the little bee house, I will be talking a little bit about that at the end as far as what we're going to do with it. But mainly we're just going to talk about pollinators and why they're important to Georgia and how we can help them. Sometimes it just takes a second to catch up. So there we go. Okay. So pollination, just so everyone is on the same page, is the transfer of pollen from male parts of a flower to the female parts of a flower. It could be the same or different flowers. Pollination is a whole other talk in and of itself. There are some really cool co-evolutionary things happening with different insects and animals and plants. So we won't get into all that, but just know that pollination is how flowers are fertilized so we can get the fruits and seeds that we eat. So for a lot of agricultural crops, this is very necessary. And the overall value of Georgia pollination is about $360 million. And I believe that's a 2018 number, but if anything, it's only gone up because agriculture is the #1 industry in Georgia. So it's insanely important that we take care of our pollinators. So all pollinators, whether they are honeybees, native bees, wasps, beetles, butterflies, or any other unrelated creepy crawly, are very, very important for us to respect, for lack of a better term, and encourage in our environment. Now, with that being said, bees of all species are going to outperform other pollinators because they actually have a dietary need for pollen and nectar. And so their relationship with flowers is one of the oldest and most significant that we have seen. Technically, beetles are the oldest pollinator. For millions and millions of years ago, there is a fossilized beetle in a magnolia relative flower. So that's just a fun fact. But throughout the ages, bees are the ones that have really successfully integrated pollen into their daily lives and really helped out flowers for the most part. Now, because pollinators are under so much stress, whether they're native or introduced, the EPA a couple years ago asked each state to produce a customized plan that promotes pollinator health and helps us to protect them. And that's what the publication on the right is. I don't know if they're still in print anymore, but Georgia did come up with a really great plan. And that's what a lot of this presentation is based on. So one thing to make sure we know, even though I'm going to really talk about native bees a lot in this presentation, is that pollinator stewardship also centers on maintaining healthy managed bee colonies too. Because even though honeybees are introduced, they are somewhat naturalized and they are really important economic factors. There's no getting over that the agricultural needs that we have established with our economy cannot be met without honeybee colonies. It's just impossible at this point. You know, things may change in the future, but right now we rely heavily on these little ladies. They're really important. So with that, we need to make sure that we keep them healthy, we manage them well, we keep them safe. We're minimizing our pesticide exposure. Pesticides are never, never, never the #1 course of action. They're not even the 2nd or 3rd or 4th course of action. You know, we only recommend pesticides if it is the most sustainable option and if someone is at risk of losing everything. So integrated pest management has a lot of steps before pesticide. So it's important to remember that. And also conserving and supplementing our existing pollinator habitat, and that's for our native bees that we're going to talk about. And just remember, we all have a role to play. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there right now, especially, you know, in the news. So a lot of times we can feel really powerless, but this is a really great low effort way that you can give back to your ecosystem. You can promote pollinator health. It can be great for the family. And sometimes it can be as easy as just not mowing for an extra week. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But everybody has a role that they can play in pollinator stewardship. So let me talk about these native bees that I've been mentioning. Here are a couple pictures and we'll go through them one by one. So first up are carpenter bees. Now I know these are the bane of many a homeowner's existence because it's true they can be a very pronounced structural pest. I will not argue with you there, but they are also important native pollinators. So they have a black body and they have some yellow and black bands on their thorax, but their thorax is mostly golden or kind of a mustardy yellow. It's covered in hairs. Now, one way you can tell carpenter bees apart from other bees, their abdomen is completely smooth. They have what Becky Griffin, our garden coordinator, likes to say is a shiny hiney. So that's one way to remember carpenter bees from bumblebees, because a lot of times they can be the same size. So they can be kind of hard to tell apart. They also have very, very wide heads with regard to their body. And also they are what we call sexually dimorphic, and that means the males look different than the females. So you can see down at the bottom there, the female is the one who chews the holes into the wood. She is also the one with the stinger, and she does not have any markings on her face, whereas you can tell the male does have markings on his face. So the males are going to be the ones that you're going to see more often because they will get right up in your face. They are very curious. They are very territorial, even though they cannot sting you if they tried because they do not have stingers. So you can grab those right in your hands and play with them. I know we would do that occasionally. They will not hurt you in the least. Their bark is definitely worse than their bite. Now, bumblebees, on the other hand, are covered in dense yellow and black hair, and they have a lot more stripes and color variation than carpenter bees do. They are very, very fat with a small head. So their thorax and abdomen are very, very large. And like I said, they're covered in hair, which makes them excellent pollinators because the pollen just gets all over there. They're almost like little Swiffer dusters. It just clings to them through an electric charge, and it just gets everywhere. So they can just transmit it from plant to plant. Now, unlike carpenter bees, these are never going to be nesting in wood. And unlike honeybees, they also don't really live in hives, but they do live in colonies. With queens and everything like that. So what they're going to do is they're going to make cells usually on the ground, and they're going to look almost like these little gumdrops, and you can see those in the lower right hand corner. They make those from a waxy secretion, kind of like beeswax in a beehive, but it looks a little bit darker here. And each individual cell is going to house a baby bee. It's going to house a larvae. And typically I see a lot of these and get a lot of calls about these under porches. They really like how sheltered they are. They like that the ground is nice and loose, so it's easy to kind of dig into a little bit. So just keep an eye out for that. They also are very common on the forest floor, so just be careful of where you step. Now here's an example. There are a lot of size variations with bumblebees. So this is just kind of an off-the-wall example of how they compare to carpenter bees. I have seen bumblebees as large as carpenter bees. However, this little lady in the lower right, she is going to be more along the lines of what you typically see, kind of that moderately sized, maybe the size of a thumbnail as opposed to your whole thumb. Now, most of the bumblebees you see are going to be female because a lot of the ones that live in colonies, most of them are female. So almost all worker bees are female. And then here is an example of a honeybee next to a large bumblebee. So again, you get kind of that size and scale right there. So even though some of the bumblebees are even smaller, you can pretty much distinguish them because the honeybees have those stripes on the back end. Their abdomen is half like golden amber and half black, and they've got a bunch of stripes, and they're not nearly as hairy on the abdomen as bumblebees are, and they're just a little bit longer too. They're not as round. They don't have the same type of shape. Sweat bees are another native bee. They are very, very small. They can range anywhere from the size of like a pinky nail to just teeny tiny. You'd think they were an ant. They have a lot of different sizes. They are actually attracted to human sweat because they really like to lap up the minerals and get the hydration and the salt. These are usually the ladies, if you're working outside, you're sweating and you kind of wipe your face or something, or you move your arm and you all of a sudden feel a sting, but then you look down and there's nothing there. It was probably one of these, because they like to lap up the sweat, but then they'll get stuck when you move your arm or in a crease or something, and they'll get startled and they'll give you a little sting. Really doesn't even hurt that much at all. They just get startled. They're not aggressive or anything. They're typically active until around October, November, about the first freeze. This is going to be true for a lot of bees, but these guys can be so brightly colored. They're very charismatic, so they can be iridescent greens, golds, blues, purples, all sorts of colors. They're really, really fun to find, especially they love zinnias or any brightly colored flower. If you see something small flying around, odds are it's one of these guys. So just take a close look, see if you can get that really bright color, and just admire it for a minute, because they're great to have around. They do prefer smaller flowers because they are indeed so small. So a lot of the early winter weeds that we have in our lawns are really important for them. Things like henbit and speedwell, and I'll show you those in a couple of slides as well. They are ground nesting bees, so they like really sandy soil. So you can see these a lot around the edges of lakes and rivers, especially because it has nice loose soil, loose sandy soil. It's easy for them to dig into, and they're going to lay their eggs and have larvae in that hole, and then eventually the larvae will turn into an adult bee and fly on out, and it'll start the process all over again. Now, mason bees are some of the first bees we're going to talk about that are actually going to live in the bee hotels that we go over. So these are some of the fastest flying bees that I have ever seen. They're like little fighter jets. They're very stout, they're very dark, and they just zip around so much. Now, in comparison to honeybees and bumblebees, mason bees and leafcutter bees that we'll talk about actually keep their pollen on the underside of their abdomen instead of carrying it on their legs in a corbicula. Their pollen stays on the underside. That's just kind of how they've developed. It's most effective for them. Now, they're called mason bees because they love to nest in holes, pre-made holes. And there's a multitude of ways you can do this. You can take reeds, like bamboo reeds that have been dried out, they're nice and hollow. You can take maybe like very, very thin cardboard or construction paper and roll it up into a tube and use that, and then kind of stick that in a can, because they really like to nest together, even though they don't really make a hive and work together. They like to live, they don't like to have roommates, but they like to live in an apartment complex, if you think about it like that. So like I said, they like the pre-drilled holes, and we call them mason bees specifically because they will take dirt and chew it up and make like a mud with their saliva. And when they go in to lay their eggs in these holes, they're going to lay their egg, fill that cell, and pack all of this pollen in with that egg. And then they're going to seal off that cell with mud. And they're going to do that 4 or 5 times all the way down the length of that reed. And so then the next season, you're going to have 4 or 5 new mason bees and start the process all over again. Similarly, leafcutter bees do the same thing. They carry their pollen on the undersides of their stomachs. And instead of using mud, these bees will actually use pieces of leaves. So if you've ever seen damage, like on the redbud leaf in the lower right, do not panic. It's nothing bad. It's not a caterpillar. It's not a beetle. Those nice, smooth, circular, rounded cutouts, those are all going to be leafcutter bees. And I've even, I had a friend in Australia send me a picture of this exact thing on his pepper plant, of all things. These nice rounded cutouts around the border. And so they will use whatever kind of soft tissued plant leaf that they have access to make their nests. So you can see the cell on the left-hand side, how they kind of wrap everything up in those leaves and then seal it off in the end. So these are also fast flyers. They're not quite as fast as mason bees. A lot of times mason bees are going to have like a bluish, blackish hue. These are going to be more flat black. And of course, the easiest way to tell the difference is one, look at their nesting site, and two, look at their habits. What are they flying around? You know, if a bee is seemingly eating a lot of dirt or soil, then it's probably a mason bee. If it's flying around a lot of leaves and chewing on those, of course, it's a leafcutter bee. So those are the main native bees I wanted to go over, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about some other pollinators and beneficial insects. So first up is wasps, which of course are closely related to bees, right? They also have stingers. They are also somewhat social or gregarious. They can have queens, lots of similar habits. Now here we have a thread-waisted wasp on the right, and we have a cicada killer on the left. A lot of these have been confused with the Asian giant hornet, so I've been getting a lot of questions about those. Luckily, they seem to have died down. But these are two native wasps that are very important. And you'll see, even though wasps are predators, occasionally they will also drink nectar. And because they have some hair, not a lot, of course, compared to the bees, they have some hair, so they will get some pollen. And you can see actually some pollen on the wasp on the right, all those little particles there. So they're more opportunistic pollinators as opposed to the bees, which have actually co-evolved as having that as one of their main purposes in the ecosystem. So some more common wasps you might see are the potter wasps. This is another thread-waisted wasp. They're mostly black with some white markings. Paper wasps are also very, very common, especially if you look up, you know, in any porch and you look up into the roof, they're probably going to be there. You will either see mud daubers or paper wasps. So they do live in colonies. They take wood pulp and mash it up in their mouths and make like a paper mache product almost. And they make all sorts of different shapes of colonies and hives. So they're very, very interesting. They're also really pretty if you just take the time to actually look at them. They're red and yellow and gold and orange and brown and black, and they've got a lot of color variation to them. So it's they're very interesting and good to have around because they do pollinate, but they're also very important predators. They will find other insects and sting them to paralyze them and bring them back to their nest to feed their young. Or they will just eat them themselves. Now, flies are also important beneficials. They are probably the least efficient pollinators, if I'm honest. So they do have hairs, but typically they're going to pollinate a very niche set of flowers. I like to say the stinky ones, not to perpetuate the fly stereotype, but they like that spicy, funky smell. They like daisies, they like mums, they do like magnolias. So even though magnolias are a little bit more sweet, that really spicy smell is what they like to, is what attracts them really. And so like I said, they're not necessarily great pollinators, but a lot of fly larvae are very important parasites or parasitoids on pest insects. So they can actually control pest insect populations, and some flies are also predators, so they can be beneficial in that way. So when you compare bees with flies, and you'll see why we're doing this in a second, some important differences are bees and also wasps are always going to have 4 wings, even though it doesn't look like they do because they're very closely attached. They do always have 4 wings. Bees are also going to have prominent antennae. A lot of times they are also elbowed. They have 2 large eyes and 3 smaller ones. They look like little pinheads in between the 2 large eyes. And then they typically carry pollen in their pollen baskets or the scopa or just all on their hair. And they're very, very hairy. Now, when we compare that to flies, flies are only going to have 2 wings. In fact, they're in the order Diptera, which means 2 wings. So it's kind of easy to remember that. They have much smaller antennae. Concerning the flies that we're actually going to see at flowers anyway. Again, insect shapes and sizes could go on all day about that. There's an exception to every rule, but for the most part, the ones that you see will have smaller antenna. They have only 2 very prominent eyes. For the most part, they don't carry pollen in a specialized way. It will just happen to get on them and they'll happen to shake it off at another flower because they're generally not very hairy. Compared to the soft downy fuzz of the bees, these guys have just more like some sensory hairs all over them to help them sense wind currents and predator movement. But I like to bring up flies because they're really smart. They've got this habit of mimicking wasps and bees that really makes them seem unappealing to birds and other predators. And that's really smart because when we're out in our garden and we are trying to figure out what all is out there, a lot of times you'll see the syrphid fly and think, oh gosh, that looks like a yellow jacket. Or, oh wow, that looks like a European wasp, because they can get really, really big. But the thing is, they are very important. Their larvae can be parasitic, like I mentioned. And again, you can see it's pretty shiny, not covered in too many hairs, but they do frequent flowers. And also you can tell the difference because they're also called hoverflies. And they zip around like UFOs. So you think bees zip around and hummingbirds zip around, these guys put them to shame. So they will, they have a very A to B to C flight pattern. So they will zip one place and hover for a second. They'll zip another place and hover, and zip another place and hover. So it's very, very linear. They don't kind of buzz around from flower to flower and kind of lilt around, have a, you know, kind of curving flight pattern. They are very just efficient. Point A to point B, that's it. So flight patterns is another really good way to tell them apart if you're afraid to get a little bit too close, because those ones that are large are very, very large. They can be pretty startling. So I mentioned that everybody has a role in pollinator stewardship, right? So, you know, I don't get the feeling that a lot of us are in industry on this talk. You feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a whole other talk I can give to y'all if you're interested on that. But as far as who we're talking to today, I'm anticipating most of y'all are renters, your homeowners, your landowners, your amateur gardeners, things like that. So this is, I'm talking to you right now and telling you how you can help out our pollinators. First of all, know the beekeepers in your neighborhood. A lot of times beekeepers will put up black and yellow flags on the edge of their property. If you're just driving by or you see those white bee boxes, like little apiaries, take note that you have bees nearby, because the bees are going to provide free pollination for you. And let me tell you, if you have a vegetable garden, that is like free labor. It is great to have. You will have the best squash, the best blueberries, all sorts of things. So don't be afraid if there are bees nearby. They're going to keep your property looking really, really nice. Always try to avoid applications of systemic insecticides to the soil anywhere near flowers, trees, and shrubs. So this is kind of a double-edged sword, because I know most of us don't want to apply pesticides if we don't have to anyway, right? But if you have a hemlock or some sort of threatened tree species or shrub species, you want to protect it, especially with heirloom and heritage breeds. You want to make sure that, you know, your plants are protected. So while I do understand that, it's really, really important that you avoid applying these systemic insecticides around any plants that are flowering. So things like a hemlock tree, you can treat with an insecticide to make sure it doesn't get hemlock woolly adelgid, because bees don't pollinate hemlock trees. So a bee will never come into contact with it. It is purely within that tree sap that the insecticide goes to. So knowing those kinds of interactions is really, really important. And if something happens and you do have to apply insecticide because your lawn is full of moles, you have beetles everywhere eating your family's garden, and you just cannot stand it, just mow first. Mow, get rid of all of the flowers. The bees will not rest in low cut grass. They're going to want to rest on high stalks. They're going to want to rest on flowers and your food sources. So if you get rid of those and then apply your insecticide, there's going to be little to no off-target effects. Just again, follow the label instructions. Make sure if it says, don't apply it near rain, you don't want runoff. You definitely don't want that. And there are usually organic alternatives too, things like milky spore for grubs. So feel free to give me a call if you have any questions about that. So there's also something like this, and I feel like maybe I think a little differently, but I look at this and I say, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with that. But you have people who say, oh gosh, they need to get rid of the leaf litter, you need to cut those trees back, you need to make sure that moss is gone and put grass there. And personally, no, you don't have to do any of that. In fact, the best thing you can do is leave significant areas of your property undisturbed for these soil nesting bees, especially if you have a creek or a river running through your property and it has that nice sandy soil that they like. You don't want them to be without their habitat, because pesticides get a lot of the buzz around this. And it's true that irresponsible and overuse of pesticides can contribute to colony decline and pollinator decline, but that's letting habitat destruction off the hook, because this is absolutely a variable in our declining populations, is habitat destruction for sure. So if you have, a sunny patch of bare soil or anything by the roadside, just let it do its thing. Don't panic if there's just a little bit of dirt. I mean, of course, if you're on a slope, you're worried about erosion, maybe this wouldn't apply in the same way. But you can also provide nest building materials in these areas, like mud. Let the rain kind of churn everything up every now and again, or waxy leaved plants or soft leaved plants for leaf cutter bees. Now these are a native aster, and again, you're going to kind of sense a theme in how to help pollinators, and that's basically just leave things alone. We have a lot of really great native plants in Georgia that a lot of folks consider weeds. So they're not actually that bad to have around. So things like these native asters, certain types of blooming hedges, even brambles like blackberries. Of course, that doesn't include multiflora rose. That is an invasive, but native blackberries, if you have a patch that you're just not using and you're never gonna get into, it's great for bunnies, it's great for birds, it's great for deer, and it's great for our pollinators. Great wildlife habitat there. And you can mow them down every year if you need to over the winter. But for the most part, just let them be over the summer. Now this I wanted to share with you because my husband and I just bought a house, and this is actually our front yard. Now it's not really anything super special right now. And that's kind of by design, right? So we have a large corner lot, and instead of mowing the entire lawn starting in February when we had that nice warm up and everything popped up, we have just kind of mowed the border, and you can see where the grass is a little bit shorter around the edges, and then we have kind of more wildflowers in the middle. Now, I took this morning, so a lot of the wildflowers are bloomed out and it's been too wet to mow. So I do want to say that. But this is, my husband actually coined a fun term for it, a minimally managed meadow. So we have done absolutely nothing to this yard. We have spread no seed. We have done nothing to it aside from mow it a couple of times after we moved in last year. And this is the type of thing that we have growing. So it was gorgeous. Over the past couple of weeks, it has just been great and full of bee activity. We have seen every single bee that I have mentioned, including some honeybees, as well as flies and beetles and a couple of wasps. So it's really, really great if you can. I understand if you're in an HOA, you may have ordinances that you need to go by. I understand. But if you have a lot like ours and you are fortunate enough to be able to do whatever you want with it, just let the winter weeds come up. So in the top picture is henbit. That is a member of the mint family. And it's got really pretty purple flowers that are just absolutely packed with nectar in those tubes. They're just totally full. So bees love those. Those pop up at the end of January or February. So they are ready for the bees once things start to warm up. And the bees are going to be hungry. So if you have this in your yard, leave it alone. They're going to love it. In fact, here's a video of a little carpenter bee eating some nectar from our henbit. And you can tell they just love it. Going from just flower to flower, and that is a male because it has the little white spot on its face. Now the four-petaled blue flower with the stripes in the middle there, that is speedwell. So that's another great flower to have, especially for those little sweat bees. It's very, very small, but you will notice tiny little blue dots around your property if you have it. And then in the lower right are native violets. So they have nice heart-shaped leaves. A lot of people consider these weeds. They are very hard to get rid of in the lawn. The way I look at it, you know, we all work really hard. I can't work against Mother Nature. When I come back from working in the office all day, I just kind of let her do her thing. So I'm not gonna, we have so many violets, I'm not gonna try to fight them. And I've seen so many bees at them, I don't want to. So again, this is a great way you can kind of make your lawn a meadow. Now, when things start warming up and the bees are going to have more resources, I'm not going to feel as bad about mowing my lawn. But typically until about the 1st of April, I'm going to let it go and let the bees have some extra resources. Now, some other things you can do, if you do have maybe a slope or an idle patch that you don't really want to just leave bare, you just can't handle that, just rake it up, get the soil a little bit loose, and if it's full sun, just throw an annual or perennial seed mix on it, and then put a light watering on it and let it go to town. Zinnias are great. They're not necessarily native. They are more kind of Central American, but they're pretty naturalized here. They do really well. They don't compete with our native plants as much. They're very easy to grow and they're only annuals, so they don't necessarily establish. So if you're an amateur gardener, you're not sure what you can grow, you're just looking for like scatter some seeds and you get pretty flowers. These are great and they're easily affordable. I know seeds in general are a little bit more expensive, but these should still be pretty reasonable. So it's a really great way to increase your pollinator resources. And also what a lot of people don't realize is things like butterflies, which again are more opportunistic pollinators. They haven't really co-evolved as pollinators like bees have, but they are important to have around. So they are, you know, many of them are being threatened. So create that dedicated pollinator space in your landscape. Use plants that you know will provide a lot of nectar and a lot of pollen, especially based on what you see around. If you see a lot of bees, make sure you plant a lot of, you know, bee-friendly flowers, a lot of round flowers that have stripes or, you know, bright colors like blues, lavenders, whites. They love things like that. You want hummingbirds and, you know, if you want to help the flies, because people don't really think about flies a lot, they love red flowers. And beetles also love white and yellow flowers. There's all sorts of different things. And again, that's a whole other talk and we're going to come back to that in April. We have a talk on how to landscape with pollinators. So I hope you will join us with that. But also plan for blooming as much of the year as possible. Okay, so you want things to be blooming from March to November to maximize those nectar resources. You want those honeybees to be able to go into winter with full honey storage. You want your native bees to have all of the energy reserves that they need when they go into the soil or into their little reed nesting site, what have you. You can also provide puddles and troughs for bees, as well as butterflies. So what people don't realize is that our pollinators and beneficial insects need more than just nectar. So some things like wasps will also, like I said, be predators, and they can get protein and minerals that way. Bees and butterflies, not so much. They have, very specific mouth parts for drinking nectar, but they also need things like salt and additional minerals and metals in their diet, just like we do. We need all of our vitamins. So you will often see them, honestly, on cow dung. So that is poop in the upper left-hand corner, or the edges of rivers and streams on the right side. And they're going to find nice damp places that have just enough moisture that they can kind of lap up everything that they need, and the nutrients slough off into kind of a smoothie, if you will. And there's a really easy way that you can do this, and to help promote, get all the resources that you have in your area. And you can take a small dish, and put river stones or river sand in it and cover it with water just barely. Just to where when you shake it a little bit, it jiggles, because you don't want mosquitoes. You don't want to fill it up to the top and have things like settling. You don't want to have layers, because like I said, then you'll get mosquitoes and you don't want that. So yeah, just kind of barely fill it up and you'll see them come to it and drink it as well. So this is a really important aspect to have as far as maximizing resources. Now, one of the last ways that you can really help pollinators is through the great Georgia Pollinator Census. And I hope y'all have heard about this, but if you haven't, our school garden coordinator, Becky Griffin, actually organized this a couple of years ago. So we are heading into our 3rd annual census this year. We are really excited. And it is a citizen science project. And you basically sit in your yard or at your school garden or wherever you would like to go that you think bees will be, with flowering plants and lots of resources. And you just sit and you watch for 15 minutes and you record what you see. So it's really easy. We've broken it down to where you don't have to be an entomologist to do this. It's very easy. We've had all sorts of groups, church clubs, garden clubs. We've had school classes do it, as well as individuals and families, because I realize not everybody, even though we time this to where almost every school in Georgia is in session, some are going to go back to virtual learning. We don't really know what this fall is going to look like. So really you can do it either as a group or on your own. It's a really great way to virtually engage your kids too, if we have any teachers on here. So just an overview of what we do. You're going to sit at a plant that you know is blooming and attractive to pollinators. So be on the lookout throughout summer. And then you're going to count the number of insects that you see on this plant. You're looking at a single plant. That single plant can have multiple flowers on it, but only that one plant for 15 minutes. And then after that, your count is done. So just make sure if you're planting a pollinator garden that your plants are going to be blooming in August, because while you can practice before August, you can't record your pollinator counts before August. And it's going to be the weekend of August 20th and 21st. It's always a Friday and a Saturday. And I have that later in the slideshow as well. Here's an example of some things that you can find online. So on the left is a screen clipping of our counting guide. So again, you don't have to be an entomologist. We have a colored picture guide of who looks like what, as well as descriptions, size guides, things like that. So you can print this off, or when it comes closer to time, I'm planning on having some of these sheets at our extension office. You can request them, or you can find them online at ggapc.org. And I've also, in case anybody is on your laptop, you want to go ahead and bookmark this site on your phone, you can scan that QR code right now. That goes straight to the Georgia Pollinator Census website. You can get your tally sheet. You can get that insect counting and identification guide on the right, which is about 14 to 15 pages, going over a lot of the same information I just went over as far as how to count what. So instead of, mason bees and leaf cutter bees, they're all just kind of grouped together into small bees. So that's something useful, and you don't have to remember everybody what everybody looks like. So do make note of this, and in the follow-up email, you will receive this information as well. So don't panic if you can't save it right now. And then finally, provide shelter. And that is going to bring us into a great segue, because native bees, like I've talked about, they love their pre-made holes and their empty reeds. It's a very easy, low-cost way to do it. So again, you can get kits like on the right. It's almost like a birdhouse, and you just don't put the front on, you just put reeds in it instead. This is a really great long-term solution because you can replace the individual reeds instead of the wood itself, and the wood is going to last longer. It's also got a nice little roof. You can see it's got metal over it. This is going to last a long time. Now, the thing on the left is going to be closer to what you're going to get in your bee kits if you signed up for it, and it's maybe a more cost-effective way to do that. And I actually have one right here. So I am going to stop my share real quick, and I'm going to adjust my lighting so you can actually see me. Ever since daylight savings time, I've been having a hard time finding the right light in here. I'm sorry. I finally got things figured out. And then we just changed. So this, if you were able to sign up for a bee house kit, this is what you're going to be able to make. So let me talk about this for a little bit. This is going to be good for mason bees and leaf cutter bees. It's going to be really easy. You don't have to mount it to a tree or anything. You can literally just set it wherever. It's very hefty. They're not going to knock it over. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is when you get your lumber, this is essentially 6 pieces all together. That's all you need. So you need one either 6-inch long or 12-inch long 4x4. Okay, so that's the bulk of the house. And you drill your holes into that. And you can attach a 5-inch long 1/2 inch by 4-inch piece of wood to it. Now, definitely always get untreated wood. Untreated wood, it can be kind of hard to find. It took me a little bit to find it. I think too, just because lumber is very strange right now, it was about double the price what it usually is, but even still, an untreated 4x4 by 8 feet long post of Douglas fir is $16 right now. And I personally went to Home Depot, and just so you know, if you get this cut, Home Depot cannot cut any shorter than 12 inches. So this was actually done, this is a 6-inch slice. It was done with a table saw, which if you have a table saw, that is the only safe way you can cut a 4x4 down from 12 inches to 6 inches. Trust me, I tried. So I can speak from experience there. Now with these, because it is untreated, it's not going to last as long as, you know, a fence post or something. And 2, you want to change them out every year anyway, especially if you're just drilling holes into it, because the bees are going to be living in here. They're going to be eating, they're going to be pooping, they're going to be shedding their skins, and there's going to be lots of organic matter left in there, and that can really foster fungus and disease and mold and other things that aren't great to have around our bees. And also, they're not going to use holes that were previously occupied. So if you happen to put this out a little bit late, you don't get too many inhabitants, maybe try to reuse it another year. But for the most part, if you see most of your holes covered up by either leaves or mud, when it's time next year, I'd say like April or May, after they've already hatched, definitely just kind of get rid of it. And you'll see that these will be sealed off, but then they'll kind of burst out of them. So they'll be opened again. So just take pictures. So if you can't remember who lives and where, just take a picture of it. So a couple of other things. In your bee house kit, you're going to get a 12-inch section, because I do not have a table saw and could not cut it any smaller than that, with several holes drilled in it. You are also going to get this 5-inch section, and you're going to nail it on top. I only gave you 4 nails. That's really all you need. And you're going to want to have 1 part flush and 1 part overhanging like a roof. And you want that part to be overhanging your holes because you don't want water to accumulate in there. Now, we've also provided paints because we thought the kiddos would love to paint them. That is one thing that we also love to do. You can really express yourself with this. But just so you know, only paint on the sides that do not have holes on them. That's very important. If you paint here, the bees are not going to think of it as a place to live. They're going to go to it and think it's a flower and get confused. And we don't want paints around the holes anyway, just to not interact with the bees. But you can absolutely paint the other sides of it. No problem at all. But again, number one rule is get untreated wood. So if you wanted to do that yourself, it's a very neighborhood friendly project. Like I said, the prices of lumber are double. If you wanted to go cedar, they're about $32 to $40 per 8-foot 4x4. So that is something to keep in mind. If you are drilling your own holes, which all of ours are going to come pre-drilled, I didn't want y'all, I figured using a hammer is always fun, but not everybody may have a drill. So if you're looking to do this yourself and you do have a drill, just anywhere a 3mm to a 6mm drill bit is good to go. I personally used a 6mm, get nice kind of larger holes to accommodate all sorts of bees. But you can make a variety of holes as well. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen again and show you the last slide, because this is really important. If you could, this is the link to the evaluation, that little QR code right there. If you can't use the QR code reader right now, that's perfectly fine. I am going to put the link in the chat while y'all submit your questions. I do want to make y'all aware of an upcoming program that we have. So similar to the bee house giveaway, of course, we're giving away completely free bee house kits. We're also giving away completely free native pollinator plant kits. And we wanted to make sure that whether you rent an apartment or if you have, several acres, you're going to get a kit that is right for you. We have container kits that have a kind of fabric 3-gallon container, and you will get a plant and some soil, as well as some seeds to put in there and some publications. If you have property, you can select and that is called the container kit. If you have property and you'd like to put your plants in the ground, you can select the landscape kit, and you will get 4 free plants with a free soil sample. So you will just need to, we'll have a specially stamped bag that you will need to bring back into the extension office. And you will have a free soil sample, so you'll know how to amend your soil before you plant your plants, as well as publications, of course. So go ahead and sign up for that. There is a link directly to this next program at the end of the evaluation. I will also provide it in the follow-up email. Also, right there is my contact information. If you guys need it, feel free, reach out, email me anytime. I believe you should have that since you signed up through Eventbrite, but either way, this is how to find me. Okay, so with that, I'm going to allow people to unmute. So yeah, you should be able to unmute if y'all have questions. All right, so how do you suggest we deal with carpenter bees? Oh, it's very, that is a very double-edged sword, isn't it? So there are times when carpenter bees do compromise the structural integrity of lumber. There's no getting around it. They are very annoying. They are not in any threat. They are not endangered. So let me just preface that. There are ways to deter them. So varnish and paint can help. If you paint or varnish the wood, adding another layer that they have to chew through can definitely help. If that does not work, obviously maybe trying something that's a harder wood to bore into, trying treated wood, things like that. Worst case scenario, they do make a carpenter bee spray. And I don't always like to recommend that. Really, I recommend it when the structural integrity is compromised. So only use that if you absolutely have to. But the good thing is it won't affect any other bees, because carpenter bees are the only ones that have that boring habit, that they bore into wood. So what you do is you apply the insecticide directly to the hole. So when it comes in and out, it gets covered in it, and it pretty much immediately takes care of the problem. And it's gonna linger for any carpenter bee that goes in and out of that hole. Now, you'll want to patch the hole. Once you kind of see the carpenter bees dropping out of that, you'll want to patch the hole pretty immediately. Don't bother patching a hole if you don't treat. They're gonna chew right through it, and you're gonna have to patch it again. So that is a wide variety of ways that you can deal with carpenter bees. Can you explain where you set the bee hotel up and how you're supposed to clean it? Okay, right. So you can really set it anywhere. I would recommend setting it kind of near pollinator resources, but also sheltered. You don't necessarily want it out in the open. Bees can get picked off by birds pretty easily. So maybe have it in a sunny spot or a partially sunny spot near a tree. You can set these like next to, if you have like garden beds with like big leafy squash plants or tomato plants, you can kind of set it there. You can also kind of set it near your house. You don't want it overheating, but you do want it nice and warm, especially if we have some cooler days in the winter. So again, you don't need to mount it on anything. Like I said, these are pretty hefty. The worst case, something may like knock it sideways, but it's not going to break. There's a reason the bees kind of cement everything in there. It's to keep everything nice and secure, but try to keep it in a secure location that it won't be bothered too much. Is there a minimum space recommended for building a pollinator habitat? No. No space is too small for pollinators. So like I said, we're giving out those container kits with just a single pollinator plant. That could make the difference for a bee that is, crossing a highway or, navigating parking lots to get back to their hive. If they can get like a little pit stop along the way, that is great to have. You shouldn't look at any space and say, I don't have enough space, I can't make a difference. Like you can, you definitely can. And if you need help or tips on how to maximize your space, we will be happy to work with you. Would varnish or paint be toxic to the bees? No, they just won't chew through it for the most part. They don't, it doesn't affect them. They just don't like it. Some people say though, when they have really desperate carpenter bees, they will actually chew right through it and live very happily. So again, it's kind of anecdotal, kind of hit or miss. I've heard that decoy wasp nests will deter construction bees. I have heard about that, and I have seen a decoy wasp nest, and I have seen carpenter bee holes right next to it. So again, some people tell me that and they swear by it. They say, hey, I have done this, or I have done the carpenter bee traps and I have not had carpenter bees since. Other people say they don't do anything. So give it a try. I would recommend, without blowing too much money, trying anything that you feel comfortable trying before you go the pesticide route. See what works for you. But I personally have no solid evidence that that wasp nest thing actually works, because I've personally seen it not work, if that makes sense. Let me see. You need at least a group of 3 plants to be attractive to pollinators. I would say to have a substantial pollinator attraction, probably, because you want to have, you want to attract different insects. And once you have 1 or 2, then more will come. But again, you can have 3 plants in a very, very small space. So I guess I was considering specifically space requirements. You can put 3 plants in the same container depending on what the plants are. So again, the greater diversity you have, if you can put 3 plants that bloom at different times, that would be amazing. That way you'll always have resources for your pollinators. But if you only have space for 1 plant, that's okay too. What flowers bloom in August? Join us for Landscaping with Pollinators in April. We do have some more questions, so I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. But yeah, I will actually specifically go over that, and some of the resources that we have on the Georgia Pollinator website list several varieties that are blooming in August. So I will provide that information to you. Herd bats are good pollinators too. In some places, out west mainly. Our little brown bats, not so much, because they primarily eat insects in flight. Whereas you do have the nectar feeding bats, like on the saguaro cactus out west, and they get absolutely covered in pollen. In one of my presentations, I have a really cute picture of one that's just like yellow in the face. It's really cute. But yeah, so they have kind of co-evolved with the cactus to be an efficient pollinator. Here, like I said, not so much. It may accidentally pollinate if it sees a mosquito or a moth and goes down and gets some pollen on it multiple times and does that several times with several flowers. But they're not, we don't really have nectar feeding bats around here, so we don't see that association. Very good point. Yes, lantana do bloom all summer. Oh, Doris dialed in from Baltimore. Awesome. Yeah, feel free to put in the chat where y'all are dialing in from. Like I said, we get people from all over. Happy to have y'all on my Lunch and Learns. I usually have a crew from Ireland, so obviously I think it's a little late for them right now. But yeah, really, really happy to have y'all here. Thank you so much for joining us. If you can hang on for just 1 second, I am gonna post the link to the evaluation in the chat. I would really, really appreciate you responding to that. There are some demographic questions. That is because we are a federally and state funded institution. We just need to make sure that we are catering to as much of our audience as possible. So again, let's see, I'm posting the link in the chat. If you can see the chat, then you can see that link. Click on it directly. If it doesn't let you click on it directly, copy and paste it into your browser. Also, a couple shout outs. I really want to acknowledge Becky Griffin. Thank you so much. A lot of this presentation was pulled directly from her work, especially with the pollinator census. She does that every year, and it's just an amazing project. I would also like to give a shout out to the Center for Urban Ag at UGA's campus in Griffin. They helped fund this whole project with a grant. So we are very fortunate to have that and have their support. They also provide a lot of educational materials for us too, so you can check out their website. Again, I will provide that in the follow-up email. I'm also going to just type my email one more time in the chat just so y'all have it. And like I said, y'all should be able to unmute if you have any comments or questions you'd like to share right now. So just let me know. And if not, thank y'all so much for attending. Like I said, please feel free to email me with any questions, fill out that survey, and I hope you sign up for our newsletter, so we'll see you at more programs. I'm gonna hang out for just another second in case anybody has any other questions, but with that, I will stop the recording.